Hey everybody, Dr. Ray Pastor, and today we're going to talk about a topic that's talked about on social media, talked about in blog posts, pretty much talked about with anyone in the esports industry. Is esports in a bubble, and what is the valuation of this industry? So let's get into it. I'm going to present some facts, I'm going to talk about some of the research out there, and tell you what I think about the state of the industry right now. The first thing I want to do is I want to define what is a bubble. When we talk about a bubble in the financial world, what does that even mean? What are people saying when they say we're in a bubble? So a bubble is an economic cycle that is characterized by rapid escalation of market value, particularly in the price of assets. So basically it's a huge surge in the value, or what people believe the value of something is, when it may not really be the true value of what it is. Very simple, right? It's something that's grown too fast and is ready to pop. This is from Investopedia.com. But that's what a bubble is. Just wanted you to be aware of that before we really get into it. So let's dig in. So you've probably heard the following statistics: that the esports industry is worth $1.1 billion. That's from Newzoo. That the player salaries are increasing way more than teams are making. That the numbers that we're reporting for esports are reported differently than the way that they report numbers for television, yet we're comparing, the League of Legends Championship to the Super Bowl. And that most teams are not getting a return on investment, that they are spending more money than they are making. These are the big arguments for the esports bubble. So we're going to address these and talk about it to find out, are we really in a bubble? So let's talk about it. All right, so first of all, news of this bubble isn't new. There's always naysayers for everything. If I told you I'm an investor in the stock market, I can tell you that I personally know people that pulled their money out of the market in 2014 because they said we were in a bubble and it was going to crash. We're in 2021, it hasn't crashed, and those people probably lost like 300% of profits because of it. So people are always saying there is a bubble for all kinds of stuff. So that's not a new thing. But news of this bubble in esports isn't new. I found an article written by the Esports Observer in 2015 saying that we were in an esports bubble. So we are 6 years later, still moving. So this was talked about in 2015. And in esports, for those of you that remember in the early 2000s, we actually had a bubble that did pop at one point. But I just wanted to bring that up, that this isn't a new topic. This is something we have been talking about for a number of years. So let's talk about that revenue, that $1.1 billion. So how is Newzoo calculating that $1.1 billion? Well, here we go. This is how they're calculating it. So how they're calculating it, it's sponsorships, it's media rights, it's merchandise and tickets, it's publisher fees, and then digital and streaming. That's where they get the $1.1 billion. So this is what they're calculating when they calculate that $1.1 billion. How much is the industry worth? And yes, it is very true. You cannot compare TV numbers to esports numbers. They're completely different ecosystems, and we can't use the same metrics that TV uses. We can't use for Twitch and YouTube. It just does not work. They're not the same kind of environments. So we're not going to have this comparable number. That doesn't mean that the numbers that we do have for esports are not important. And that doesn't mean we can't look at them in many different ways. And that doesn't mean we can't come up with, which we already are, industry standard metrics for viewership numbers for esports. It's just that it can't really be compared on a fair level to TV any way we try to swing it, because they're just different ecosystems. So yes, let's get that out of the way first of all. That's the whole number metric thing. All right. But the big thing with the esports bubble is on the valuation of the industry. And I've talked about this in some of my live videos before, but we're going to get to it right now. This is where the biggest problems exist, in that valuation. So let's talk about it. So the first thing, what happens? You saw this chart back here a little bit about how how we calculated the value of esports. Nowhere in that chart did it say, here's a question. What happens if I buy a skin from my favorite character in a game and, that a pro has? I bought it because a pro had it. Does that count? No, that doesn't count. That wasn't in that calculation. So wait a second. You're telling me that if, one of my favorite League players is Faker, you're telling me that if I buy a skin that I see Faker using because he's using it and I want to be like him, that I'm not saying I do, I'm just saying if I did, that wouldn't count towards esports revenue. I actually did buy the latest Call of Duty this November because of the pro scene. I would have not bought it any other way. So you're telling me that doesn't count? That's not part of esports revenue? So here's a bigger question. Would League of Legends exist if there was no LCS? That's the competitive part of League of Legends. Would it exist? Remember, this game's, going on a decade old. Would games that can be competitive in nature, like League of Legends, like Call of Duty, like CSGO, like Apex Legends, like Halo, would they exist and have the viewership numbers they do without a competitive scene? And I can provide examples of, yes and no cases. Like, we've seen some games rise up recently because of the competitive scene. Their viewership on Twitch has went up. Their popularity has went up because of the competitive scene. We've also seen games dwindle because of poor competitive scenes, like what's happened in Halo, which hopefully is going to improve with the next release because I love that game. But, we've seen this happen. So the big question is, what percentage of revenue generated by League of Legends exists because of the League of Legends Championship Series and competitive play in League of Legends? What would happen? So here's my question for you. What would happen if we said there's no such thing as esports in League of Legends anymore? There's no LCS, there's no competitive play, there's nothing. What would happen to the numbers? Do you think they would go up? I do not. I think they would go down significantly. The question is by how much? Would they go down by 10%, 20%, 50%, 70%? How much would they go down? How much would they fall? So if we were to think of it like that, the percentage that it would drop needs to be attributed to esports. Remember, League made $1.75 billion in 2020. Activision, between Call of Duty, Overwatch, and Hearthstone and StarCraft, made $5 billion in 2019. Fortnite made almost $2 billion in 2019. What percentage of these games would not exist without esports? That percentage needs to be attributed to esports. Remember, when I showed you that table 2 slides ago, that wasn't calculated in that percentage. Additionally, you know what else wasn't calculated in that percentage? The college scene, the high school scene, the middle school scene, the amateur scene, software around esports like Discord, and whatever else was not included there. This is different than other sports. Let me explain what I mean. So whenever anything is attributed to professional football, whenever something happens, whenever anyone buys a jersey for the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Steelers are aware of that revenue coming in and know that they bought it from the pro team. The difference in video games is that there isn't like League of Legends isn't just like a thing that's out there. It's owned by a company versus the teams which don't actually own any part of the game publisher. So there's like this odd relationship that traditional sports don't have. There is no game publisher. Nobody owns football, but somebody owns League of Legends, somebody owns Overwatch. So it's very hard to track where things are coming in and out of. So fortunately, we have some people that have attempted to do it. So there was a recent study done by An Collis and Jenny in 2020. And what they did is they tried to actually get a true estimate of esports by calculating some of that stuff into the equation. So what they came up with, first of all, they found, and I still think this is undervalued, that the true estimate of the esports industry is probably much closer to $25 billion versus that $1 billion. They also found out their conclusion is that about 20% of game revenue, that's Fortnite, that's League of Legends, that's Call of Duty, that's Overwatch, that's Hearthstone, can be attributed to esports. So about 20% of the money that Fortnite is making is because of their competitive scene. So when they've calculated their valuation, they've included all that stuff in the valuation. So that means, so Newzoo predicted our industry's worth about $1 billion right now. Some of the later research out there, and this is something being discussed in industry right now, is that it's probably 25 times higher than that, probably closer to $25 billion. All right, so that leads us into this question of, are we in a bubble? So first, let me say that we are in the Wild West of esports. Wild West. You hear the people saying that. I've been saying that since I got involved in the industry. We're in the Wild West. It's the Wild West right now. We're not the NFL. We're not Major League Baseball. We're not the soccer leagues. We just don't have that established yet because we are too new. Just like they went through all that early, struggles, we are doing the same thing. Secondly, when we talk about how much is the industry worth, or how much is esports worth, what are we actually talking about? Are you only talking about the professional teams? Are you talking about the revenue the game publishers is made from esports? Are you talking about the collegiate scene, the amateur scene, the software created around esports? What exactly are you talking about when you say or how much this industry worth or how much esports is worth? To ask someone when they say how much is esports worth, say what exactly are you referring to? Because that's the big question. Because they might only be referring to one specific thing in the whole ecosystem of esports. Secondly, and this is something I guess the point of the video is that we aren't in an esports bubble, though the pro teams themselves, the professional teams, may be in a bubble if the model isn't changed. I'll elaborate on that in a second, and I'll read it again. We aren't in a bubble. Esports itself is by nowhere near in a bubble. However, the professional teams themselves may be in a bubble if the current model isn't changed. Okay, let me also point out a note here. If someone truly says that we are in a bubble, if you were 110% certain that we are in a bubble right now, I would encourage you to put your money where your mouth is, invest your money, and short the esports market. Because if someone is so convinced that we're actually in a bubble right now and they know we are, why wouldn't you get rich off of that? You ever saw the movie The Big Short, how he shorts the housing market? You can 100% short the esports market. There are tons of companies out there, publicly traded, that are involved in the esports ecosystem that you can go out and short. So if you truly believe we are in a bubble, go invest your money, prove everyone wrong, and get rich off of the bubble. Just go do it. Don't say we're in a bubble. Show me that you really believe it by putting your money in it and getting rich off it. Because if you believe it, man, you'll get rich off of it. Because guess what? I'll tell you where my money is invested. My money's invested in that EcoSport center around esports for increasing. And guess what? It's been going up. It's going up, and I'm making money off it. I don't believe we're in a bubble. I actually believe the opposite. I believe we're in a trying time that there is part of the model needs to change. Let me explain. So let me explain what I meant when I said the teams could be in a bubble, but I don't believe the ecosystem is not. So I think the biggest problem with people saying we're in an esports bubble is they're not calculating the value of esports in game publishing and how much game publishers are making because of esports. In fact, if a new game is released, let's just take Apex Legends, which was released like a year, 2 years ago, something like that now. Apex Legends, if there wasn't a pro scene around it, popularity's been increasing so much because of the scene around the game. If that didn't exist, if we did not have that competitive scene around Apex Legends, I don't know if the game would have any viewership right now, any players. The new competitive seasons are what's making the game. I'm not sure the game would even really want to exist without it. And that's going to be the same with any first-person shooter game that comes out like that, or battle royale, like when the new Halo comes out, Halo Infinite, that's coming out in the next year or so, whenever they're actually releasing it after COVID. Just remember that without these pro scenes, these games may not exist. You have to attribute that money. So here's what needs to happen. The publishers need to better acknowledge the impact that esports are having on their revenue and profit. The publishers need to better acknowledge the impact that esports are having on revenue, and they need to compensate for that. The professional model of esports needs to change. That doesn't mean we're in a bubble. It just means that we're not calculating. We're not doing this correctly right now for some odd reason. And eventually what's going to happen, those pros, see, here's why I don't think we're in a bubble. Because if the pros teams start to fail because their ROI isn't making, the game publishers aren't going to let them fail. Just like how big government didn't let our banks fail in 2007. They bailed them out, not the rest of America, a whole other story. Game publishers aren't going to let them fail because they actually need the pros to succeed. We're attributing it right now. Research is finding 20% of the game publisher revenue is being attributed to that. The game publishers are where we're talking about Fortnite making we're talking about $500 million of what Fortnite made is attributed to the competitive scene. So yes, they are going to start investing more heavily in that as things continue. We're just in this this model where we're not sure where it's going. But if you want to look at it and you want to think about all the angles and what's really happening, this is the next step. The next step are the game publishers becoming more involved in the compensation and revenue structure of the professional teams in the league. That's what I think is going to happen. So those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think. I'm very open to hearing other points of view. I've talked to numerous other professionals in the field about this. We all have come to the same conclusions that yes, the current model for the professional teams is definitely not working. It never was working. But we also acknowledge that it's not really a bubble because the money is actually being made. It's just not being distributed correctly. So, that will change. It's going to change if the games want to continue to make that money. So, let me know your thoughts. Very curious, very happy to talk to people about it. And yes, if you talk to me in 6 months from now, my thoughts may totally change on this issue as more things happen. But me taking all the current information and factual data that I have, this is my conclusion. Thank you.